On October the 29th, 1956, Israel mobilized. Within hours, the army stood ready, and all the effective reserves, every able-bodied man and woman in Israel, stood with them. For 8 years, raids by Fedayeen, Egyptian suicide commandos, had broken all international agreements. Over 1,000 Israelis had been killed, many of them civilians. Countless cattle had been stolen. Water pipelines had been destroyed. In Cairo, Colonel Nasser had threatened to completely annihilate Israel, and even now was planning an invasion. Israel was forced to strike back, and so on this day, mechanized units and infantry moved across the border into the Sinai desert to attack. Protests and minor reprisals had failed to halt Nasser's Fedayeen outrages. With reluctance, Israel resorted to all-out assault. With infantry in close support, the offensive got underway, rolling back the numerically superior Egyptian opposition. Operating from such outposts, the Fedayeen had been bold enough in staging surprise raids on civilians, but fled in disorder when faced with military opposition. The Israel Defense Forces swept on, meeting token opposition except in isolated cases. Gathering impetus, the advance left stranded Egyptian vehicles in its wake. 2 months before, Nasser had formed an alliance with Jordan and Syria against Israel. But every mile overrun was reducing the dictator's grandiose schemes of conquest to ashes, death, and disillusionment. This was the result of rabble-rousing and invoking mass hysteria. Vital roads sent to Israeli hands, allowing the freer movement of troops and supplies. False reports given to the world by Cairo spoke of the invaders being annihilated. Far from being annihilated, the Israeli forces dug in occasionally, preparing against the counterattacks which never came. Human endurance demanded rests. Women with the forces scanned a wilderness of sand, which 2 full Egyptian divisions were supposed to be defending. The advance had carried the army well into the Sinai desert and within a few miles of the Suez Canal. Fluid in more senses than one, the situation offered little respite for collecting accurate information, making reports, and attending to even the smallest personal matters. Up forward, the spearhead of the attack was flushing out pockets of resistance and causing heavy losses in lives and equipment. Practically all Egypt's equipment, many million pounds of which was captured and destroyed, had been supplied by countries behind the Iron Curtain. Subsequently, great stores and dumps were found untouched. True, much of it was intended for the invasion of Israel, but it's more likely that it had been dumped in readiness for the alleged volunteers from Iron Curtain countries who might be sent in later. Troops can be flown in quite easily and immediately become a formidable force if their heavy armor is already on the spot awaiting them. We cannot as yet fully comprehend the motives behind the supply of this war material, nor can we accurately assess Russia's interest in Egypt's welfare. But there must have been solid grounds for Nasser's braggadocio and increasing threats which disregarded all fears of reprisals. And who can say what worldwide ramifications have been avoided, or at least delayed, by Israel's initiative in meeting threats with violence, and Egypt's abject cowardice, symbolized by the flags of surrender which appeared like some pestilent rash. Only the stench remained in towns and villages, deserted by people with neither the convictions nor the courage to back up their screaming lip service to their arrogant dictator. Here was the silence which arose from the noise and tumult. Striking northwest, fast-moving columns made important gains on the railway leading from Egypt to the Gaza Strip. This thrust to the shores of the Mediterranean cut off a valuable retreat route from Gaza. With Gaza isolated, more places were occupied. deserted save for a handful of inhabitants, bewildered and frightened by the events of the past few days. Left behind in the feverish rush by civilians and army alike to the safety of the canal zone, they gave themselves up with some signs of relief. Among military prisoners were Sudanese, dupes in Nasser's fraudulent plans of expansion. Throughout the campaign, 5,000 Egyptians were taken prisoner and some 3,000 killed in battle. There was not much left of Nasser's two well-equipped divisions, an over-boosted force of 20,000 men. Israel had broken the lines by which she was to have been garroted. With the pincers closed, full pressure was brought to bear on the Gaza Strip itself. This has always been a thorn in the nation's side. And as the trap closed in, the Israel Defense Forces were in high spirits. The years of apprehension were over, and sweet indeed it was to tear down the portraits of Colonel Nasser, issued in vast numbers to fan the flames of Arab nationalism and hatred of Israel and the West. In Gaza itself, the Israeli flag was run up, a particular moment of triumph and jubilation. The Egyptian Governor-General of Gaza came to discuss surrender terms with Asaf Sinchoni. A year ago in Cairo, this man was a member of a spy tribunal which sentenced innocent Jews to death. Now humiliated, he tasted the bitter dregs of abject defeat. The surrender terms were discussed and set down on a hilltop overlooking an Israeli settlement which has suffered greatly from its proximity to Gaza. Committed to paper, the surrender was signed, though few people are still naive enough to put much store by Egyptian promises, undertakings, or agreements. The final triumph was the capture of the islands of Tiran, ceded to Egypt by Saudi Arabia and used to close the Gulf of Aqaba and Eilat to Israeli shipping. The whole campaign was over in 7 days, during which the southernmost tip of the Sinai Peninsula was reached. For the hard-hitting Israeli forces, it was a triumph of valor, speed, and efficiency. It was the first time that Jews had cast aside their traditional roles of peace, and as one nation had gone to war. Their casualties were mercifully light, particularly when measured against the toll taken of the foe who threatened their very existence. But at most, the truce is an uneasy one, and the threat still exists. What further arrogance Israel can expect from her enemies, or what support and help from her friends, time alone will tell. Provoked beyond endurance, Israeli soldiers and civilians fought selflessly for Israel's survival. Her commander, Moshe Dayan, could not have had more loyal support. But the victory parade merely marks the end of hostilities in which Israel has been compelled to sacrifice far more than she has gained. She needs help to solve her final territorial problems, to restore her economy disrupted by her people's fight for their rights. Without help, a brave, industrious nation cannot hope to survive and ultimately prosper.